I think there's a real exciting understanding about patient acquisition now. How do we bring more people into the legal regime? We've got some new clinics coming to market with some really innovative and aggressive marketing strategies. I'm quite excited to see how quickly patient numbers increase in 2026 and 2027. And then that's going to have a knock-on effect in terms of the corporate commercial activity. And we're just starting to see signs of life from a deal perspective here in Europe. High Tide took a position in Remexian in Germany. BAT and Organigram have done a deal for Sanity Group on a high valuation. And that's given people confidence now that there's going to be capital flowing back into the industry. I think you'll start to see that deal activity ramp up in the next couple of years. I think there'll be clinics in the UK being acquired. And also, I hope some companies will resurrect their IPO ambitions and, really push on to raise capital and grow rapidly as, economic prospects improve over here. So yeah, it's a really, really exciting time.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cannabis Accounting Podcast. Today, I have with me my friend, Robert Jappie, partner at Field Fisher, a UK lawyer in the cannabis space and has been for some time. So for those who don't know you, Robert, I'll kick it over to you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, Ray. Thanks very much for having me on today. My name's Robert Jappie. I'm a partner at Field Fisher. We're a European law firm headquartered here in London. About 7 or 8 years ago, I set up the UK's first dedicated cannabis regulatory department. Back in 2018, we had a nice CBD industry here in the UK that was doing well and growing rapidly. My timing was good. About 6 or 7 months later, the UK government legalized medical cannabis here, much to everyone's surprise. So for about the last 7 or 8 years, I've been advising cannabis companies at all stages of the supply chain in the UK. And I'm a regulations guy, so I specialize in regulation and compliance, risk and regulatory intervention. So as you can imagine, I'm very busy with all of the aspects of medical cannabis and cannabis business that happen here in the UK.
Nice. And yes, it's a highly regulated, policy-intensive industry that's, I like to think it's always progressing forward. So it kind of just never ends, policy and regulations and updating it. But from your time before cannabis,
it is heavily regulated, and the regulatory environment is always changing. So yeah, it's exciting, and you know how it is with these new sectors. When you're involved early on, you have an opportunity to set the standards and to frame the regulatory environment as well. So yeah, it's been an interesting few years.
And was there anything like that was unique to you when you started? Because you had to, serve non-cannabis traditional businesses for a number of years. When you started to serve CBD and cannabis, medical cannabis companies, what were some of your initial thoughts or just differences where you're like, okay, this is a unique thing or a different beast?
Yeah, so how it came about is I took a break from private practice and I actually went and worked in the legal team at a charity, a drugs and human rights charity called Release. And it was whilst I was there that I was writing an article about 420 in the US and how it had come to the UK. And as I sort of dug deeper, I saw that, legalization was rolling out across the US rapidly, state by state, first medical, then recreational. And it was almost like a light bulb moment. It sort of hit me when cannabis comes to Europe, it's going to be a big deal. So even after I went back into private practice, I couldn't stop thinking about cannabis and, this opportunity in the UK and Europe. And so I started doing some due diligence on what was happening here. And I was shocked to find we had this well-established CBD industry. There was even a trade association, the Cannabis Trades Association. And there were all these businesses that were operating online and in mainstream retail, making good revenues from CBD. So that was a real surprise to me. I didn't realize that any of this existed. So that was something of a real pleasant surprise to see that actually this CBD industry had been going for 2-3 years and growing fast in the UK. So my timing was good to sort of get into it still at an early stage. It was great.
Okay, nice. And then that was interesting, kind of the transition from hemp CBD. Because I remember when CBD was, very, it still is a very big thing because it's still medical. And that's kind of the thing is like people just, hemp kind of came on the scene as this unique alternative that was, providing health benefits, but also operating within the legal framework. So I guess just thinking beyond CBD to the true medical cannabis, I guess just early days in the UK, how did medical cannabis get legalized? What was behind it? What were like the initial goals? Because similar to like you said, I still ask my cab driver, like when I get to the UK, I'm like, oh, why are you here? I'm here for a cannabis conference. And they're always like, in their cool British accent, like, oh, I didn't even know cannabis was legal. Like, tell me more about this. And I'm like, you live here. Like, how do you not know this? But
Yeah,
yeah,
same.
those early
Uh,
days.
of awareness of the legalization of medical cannabis is still a challenge here in the UK, where we're still working hard to spread the word and let people know that it is available and it's a viable option for lots of people dealing with different medical conditions. And how it all came about is in 2018, there was a Stellar Media campaign, which was on the front page of every newspaper in the country, and it surrounded mothers of very sick children, these children with epilepsy, who were traveling to Holland or wherever to obtain these cannabis oils, medical cannabis oils for their children's conditions. And as they'd re-enter the UK, the border force, the customs agents, would seize the medication from them because it wasn't legal here. And you can imagine who could begrudge a mother trying to get medication for their sick child, right? So public opinion swung very hard behind the legalization of medical cannabis. And it was a really unusual situation, right? The Home Office they had a 6-week consultation period, which is unheard of here. And, very quickly thereafter, they legalized medical cannabis. So on the 1st of November 2018, they created a safe and legal access route for people to have CBPMs, cannabis-based products for medicinal use. But the reason why the industry here has taken so long to really get going is because it was never the intention of the government to create a commercially viable regulatory environment that businesses could operate and thrive in. It was purely just to give access to those that really, really needed it. And so that's why it's taken some time for medical cannabis to get going here, because the companies have had to adapt to this sort of challenging and restrictive regulatory environment. And it's only now that we're starting to see real progress.
No, I appreciate that added context, and it definitely makes sense where, right, it's, from the government's perspective, because we live in the world of cannabis business, and we're like, well, this is what we're trying to do, where regulators, they're protecting their population and the public health. And yes, we need tax revenue, but we need to make sure everybody's safe. That is interesting. They're like, you said this person needed medical products. We gave them access to it. But then like from the business side, it's like, well, we can't create a business just around that avatar. We need more patients.
And in fact, there's been several instances where the industry has gone to the government, to Parliament, and said, look, we need help here. You need to change these regulations. You need to help us be able to run a business here and do it well and do it properly. And the government's response has been like, that's not what you asked us for. That's not what you were campaigning for. You never said that you wanted to drive a commercial industry here. You did what we did what you asked us to. Not our problem anymore,
And that's almost like it's like a social cause versus the commercial cause. And that's where it does kind of get a little blurry, where you really need to like live in the industry to kind of understand these nuances, because of course there is a social cause for cannabis. It is a very much an alternative that's healthy. There's a lot of healthy alternatives that medical products offered compared to traditional, pharmaceutical drugs. But then there's also, like the commercial cause of, well, we're not a non-for-profit, so we got to do this a specific way, like thinking through just the product side of it, because that is kind of a nuanced thing that's easier for the audience to understand. Where I remember out in Colorado or California early days, like there wasn't a lot of differences between medical or adult use products. They were all pretty much the same. And I think it's because in the States, we're more of the Trojan horse mentality of like, just get something legalized, then we'll move on to adult use. And medical is great, but it's not the end goal, for better or for worse. And so, but also just having been around actual like medical patients and medical products, like they don't want to grind up flour and roll a spliff. Like they would rather have a vape or an edible or a tincture. And so I guess just from the UK's perspective, what type of products were legalized early on and what type of products are in the market now? Like, do you have flour? Is it still restricted to other products? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So in typical UK government fashion, they couldn't be bothered or didn't have the time or the will or the inclination to create a bespoke regulatory environment for medical cannabis. They just stuck it into an existing regulatory environment that didn't really fit that well. And this is the unlicensed medicines business, right? This is specials, we call it. And in fact, it's actually a pretty broad regime, right? Any patient that has an unmet clinical need, a doctor can write a prescription for a product that has not received licensing here in the UK, right? So these are medications that are unlicensed, but none of the existing treatments on the market are suitable for a particular patient. So a doctor is able to prescribe something that's unlicensed. And in fact, probably about 80% of patients in the UK are receiving flower. It's a flower market, right? And that's been one of the issues which has prevented growth in the sector. Getting doctors here in the UK comfortable with prescribing flower has been challenging, right? It's not something they are used to doing. It's not something a lot of doctors would feel comfortable doing. And it's not something a lot of the regulators feel comfortable in approving of, right? So it has been difficult getting doctors into the sector. Educating them about these products has been a challenge as well. And we've probably got about 30 or 40,000 doctors who are actually eligible to prescribe medical cannabis. There's probably only about 300 or so who are doing it regularly, right? So as the industry has grown and patient numbers have scaled, making sure we've got the doctors and the infrastructure in place to be able to service these new patients, to service the existing patients, has been a real challenge that the medical cannabis clinics have had to address. And obviously, as the industry has started as a flower game, clinics have wanted, the sort of heavy consumers, the 50, 60, 70, 80 grams a month type patients to come to their clinics. And there's been a lot of fighting between the clinics for these very cannabis familiar patients. But as the patient numbers have grown now and more clinics have come to the market, you're starting to see an effort to try and broaden the addressable market, right? Bring in more cannabis naive patients, bring in more delivery methods that will service people, as you say, that don't want to mess around with flour, that don't want to have to grind things up, that don't want to use a vaporizer. So we're starting to see a lot more alternative delivery methods now being available. So we've got vapes, gummies. We've had gummies on the market. There's been some regulatory issues with that. The regulators are not a big fan. Oils are now becoming more popular. And I think you'll start to see even more delivery methods being made available, tablets, soft gels, that kind of thing. But yeah, for the most part, it's been a flower game. Push as much flower as you can.
Okay. And again, that is very unique because for sure, as I kind of just think like even smoking, like doctors, it's an inhalation product. And so I know there's other, use cases where it's, flower, vapes tend to be inhalation products, where then you have beverages and edibles, which it's more of an ingestible product. So it hits your bloodstream a slightly different way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see how it's like a unique, convincing doctors to prescribe smoking almost. And it's like they got to wrap their head around it.
Yeah. So the regulations actually stipulate that you cannot consume your medication via combustion, right? So rolling in a spliff and smoking your medication actually negates your position as a legal patient here in the UK. The prescription is written for vaporization, right? So all of the patients are using Stores and Bickel packs, all of these devices. They vaporize their medication, and on that basis, the doctors are comfortable with it. But yeah, any sort of combustion, the doctors will never prescribe a product meant for combustion. And that's something patients have adapted to. Most patients will be quite comfortable using their vaporizer. But of course, there's still a lot of patients that do enjoy a joint or a spliff, right? So that's an issue that has cropped up in certain legal instances here in the UK.
No, that's interesting. And kind of and yes, the patient medical card counts, like we need to get those up. But I want to just touch on because I found it very interesting. So yeah, there's roughly 300 actual doctors or pharmacies out of 30 to 40,000 doctors and pharmacies that are prescribing it. And so and I just immediately go to like a supply chain because it seems like a bottleneck. Like we can produce as much as we want in other markets and get it to the UK where the pound is a strong currency. You have a roughly wealthy population. But if only 300 retail, I think of doors, it's like, all right, because we need to get more retail doors open. There's always this like step that happens in a market where we open up the perfect amount of cultivation to pair with the perfect amount of retail stores. So the consumers are buying it. Everybody's making money. But in my experience, it's rare. There's either way too much product and not enough doors, or way too much doors and they're like fighting over product. And so kind of having only 300 pharmacies for medical how do you guys go about educating the pharmacists? And can you talk, I guess, just first, like, how do you think through the supply chain of getting medical products to the end consumers in the UK? Like, does it start in the UK, then end with a medical patient, or does it start in Canada on their medical program? Can you talk a little bit about who the supply chain and then who are the main phases of it?
Yeah. So look, the supply chain, I break it down into 4 parts, right? To keep it nice and simple, right? So you have
Please do. Keep it simple for me, Robert.
stage 1 is cultivation and production, right? And most of the vast majority of product going to patients in the UK is produced overseas. So we import a lot from Canada, from Eastern Europe, Macedonia, Portugal. There's product now on the market from South Africa, and we even have some Thai products coming into the UK now. But there are some domestic cultivators here. So there's 3 or 4 companies that have the licenses to grow product and have product in the market in the UK. It's not an easy business, right? Because the cost, they'll never be able to compete with the low cost of production that you enjoy in other countries. The electricity is very expensive here. Labor is very expensive here. But the advantage they have is their product is here. It doesn't have to travel halfway around the world to get to the patient. So they do have that advantage. Stage 2 is import and distribution. So you have these very well-established companies that have a whole suite of licenses from the Home Office, from the MHRA, and they will import the product, they will store the product, and they will distribute it to the pharmacies. And that's stage 3. Stage 3 is the pharmacy. This is dispensation of the medication to the patient, and that can be either a patient going into the pharmacy and collecting it, or in most cases it's distance selling, right? So these are pharmacies that courier the medication to your door. And then probably the most important stage is stage 4. That's the clinics, right? These are the businesses that house the doctors that do the prescribing, and they engage with the patients. So that's how the supply chain works here in the UK. In terms of actual patient numbers, we believe we pushed past 100,000 patients in the UK market at the end of last year, and patient numbers seem to be doubling year on year. So our expectation is we should push through 500,000 patients in the next 3 to 4 years, which is very, very exciting. We have about 30 clinics, medical cannabis clinics, that are serving that patient population. And I said those 300 doctors will be, depending on the size of the clinic, some clinics will have 5 doctors, some will have 10, some will have 20. There's 4 big clinics at the moment here in the UK. So the big ones are Curaleaf. We have Alternaleaf, which is Montu. That's an Australian clinic that's come here and set up operations and expanded very, very quickly. We have Relief Dispensary. They're a clinic that is pushing out into the cannabis naive population. So they are targeting more mainstream patients to bring into the cannabis regime. And then you have Medica. So those are the big 4. But there's a few other good ones coming up behind them. CB1, Cantourage, these guys are getting beyond 5, 10, 15,000 patients. So it's an exciting moment in the UK. And the reason why we're excited is that recent studies show there's anything between 1.4 and 1.8 million people in the UK who are self-medicating with cannabis from the illicit market. So it must be possible for us to get to 500, 600, 700, 800,000 patients where we have a market comparable to Germany. And I think that's why a lot of the focus is on the UK at the moment, because the German market is looking pretty saturated now, although there's still a lot of product being imported there. In terms of patient numbers, we don't know how much further they can go. The Australian market is looking to be moving towards saturation. There's probably going to be some regulatory pullback there as well. So it looks like focus is now turning onto the UK. We hope we're at the sort of bottom end of that hockey stick where we're going to see really, really substantial growth. And you've got clinics making money and being profitable, and that means more and more demand for high quality, reliable product as well. So I think that's why there's a lot of international interest in what's happening in the UK.
No, that makes sense. I mean, any market that's set to 3 to 5x over the next few years, that's an interesting market to be a part of. Because we're fortunate to some extent in the United States, even though we're still federally illegal. But each state kind of does its own thing. We have 50 states. So there's always some new state that's either going there. We like the inflection points from nothing to medical to adult use. And so, yeah, it just continues, but it's a bit of a process. But we like it because we know when it goes from medical to adult use, you do see like a 3 to 5x in revenues, just the whole market gets bigger because instead of having to go to your doctor, get a medical patient, then go to this very specific, supply chain, it does just make it a little bit more easier. And it's not that like more people are buying more cannabis. It's like, to your point, it's the cannabis naive or canna curious, where like once it's adult use, then they're like, yeah, sure, I'll try it. And it just like starts this kind of snowball effect. And we just seen it multiple times where it's like you can have a thriving business that's just medical. And once it flips to adult use, those retail stores, you can kind of convert some of them to AU. Your supply chains from cultivation to product manufacturing, you can kind of, candidly, I don't see them investing in a lot of like, oh, we're going to upgrade from medical to adult use. You just switch the price. But either way, it grows. So no, the UK is definitely set to grow. And even though we know adult use is a long ways off, just your card patient holder, like that's kind of the signal. And if it's going from 100 to 500, you're like, yes, that's going to very materially change the market. One question I had, because I was a little confused on the supply chain. So I get it. We make the flower, turn into a product. It's got to be EU GMP. Import it to a distribution center where it'll probably go to other markets. But the pharmacy retail piece of the supply chain, and then the clinics, like in my mind, like the pharmacy is the clinic. So you'd go to the pharmacy and then you'd pick up your script. But I guess like now that I say that, you would go to a doctor first, usually at a different place. The doctor would analyze you, say, this is what you need. Here's your prescription. And then I would go to like, I don't know, like we call them CVS in the United States, but some type of Walgreens type pharmacy to pick it up. Is that like is that the difference? Like, what is the difference between pharmacy retail and then the clinics that house the doctors? Just so I can understand.
Yeah, so this is a really great question, and we're getting into the real technicalities of it, right? So
that's what I'm doing. This is Cannabis 3.0
no, this is
on my podcast.
No, these are good questions. So from a commercial perspective, a clinic itself doesn't make money. A good clinic will break even, but generally the clinic, the consultation fees, the fee to see the doctor, goes to pay the doctors, right? The clinics are there to pay the doctors and to keep them happy and to service them. Bear in mind, this is a private market, so the doctors obviously expect to be paid quite well. And when there's not that many of them actually prescribing, they're very, very valuable, right? So they're not cheap. So where a clinic will have to make money is in the pharmacy margin, okay? The margin in the pharmacy has to cover the clinic too. So there's a couple of different types of models. Most clinics will have their own pharmacy. Okay, and they will want the patients to receive the prescription and then receive their medication from their own pharmacy. If the patient has a right to go to any pharmacy that it wants, if it starts going to a different pharmacy than the clinic wants you to, the clinic is losing out. So there's obviously some issues. The clinics try to direct and control the patients to go to the pharmacy of their choosing. Some clinics will work with lots of pharmacies. They'll have partnership arrangements, not profit share arrangements, so to speak, but they will pay the pharmacies a dispensing fee, and they reconcile all of the payments. So the pharmacy and clinic relationship is very, very important. The pharmacy has to make enough money to actually make the clinic worthwhile as well. And so just on a very basic analysis, let's say the cultivator is selling its weed for £2 a gram. Right, the pharmacy will buy it for £4 a gram. So there needs to be margin there for the importer and distributor. They'll probably be charging £1 or £1.50 a gram or something like that to do the import, the packaging, all that kind of stuff. And then the pharmacy will then sell the cannabis to the patient at £8 a gram. So then there's a £4 margin to share between the clinic and the pharmacy. So that's obviously a very, very basic analysis. But obviously you can see once you start to scale those numbers, then there's money for everybody at each stage of the supply chain. So yeah, the clinic-pharmacy relationship is vital, because otherwise there's no point in having a clinic, right, if you're just going to lose money.
And that makes sense, because I do remember, like, I don't go to the doctors often, but like, yes, I know I remember the process. You go there, doctor prescribes something, then you got to go somewhere else. How many pharmacies are there? Because you had mentioned something earlier, like the pharmacies are seeing material profit margins from these products where it's like, oh, and it's I'm sure everybody just assumes pharmacy makes tons of money hand over fist, but like it's not all big pharmacy. There's like lots of companies in the supply chain. But like, how many pharmacies are there? Like, if there's 300 clinics or doctors willing to prescribe it, is there 300 pharmacies, or is there 1,000 pharmacies?
No. So all of the big clinics will have their own pharmacy, right? Curaleaf will have its own pharmacy. My Medica has its own pharmacy. And these are not, your physical CVS, Walgreens type pharmacies where you can walk in. All of this is done online, right? So the clinics operate as telemedicine platforms. It's very rare to have a physical clinic that people walk into. It's video consultations and all that kind of stuff. And then these pharmacies, they have special licenses called distance selling licenses. So they receive the prescription from the doctor, and like e-commerce, it goes into a basket. They package up your medication, and then it gets sent out by post or by courier. Like I said, the big clinics, the vertically integrated companies will have their own pharmacy, but there are some specialist pharmacies that service the medical cannabis sector here. So you're looking at companies like Pharmacy Express, Specials Pharma, Dakota One, New Groves, Cedarwood. These may be established pharmacy businesses in some cases, like Cedarwood, but they'll have a dedicated medical cannabis service now. The fee structures change dramatically. Some want a sort of cut of the price being paid by the patient. So you can't necessarily call it that, but that's how it works. Some will charge a flat dispensing fee. Every prescription they issue, it's a flat fee, which is a nice, simple way to do it. But yeah, that's something we do quite a lot of, is these contracts between the pharmacies and the clinics and also the importers and distributors. These are quite complex contracts because of the nature of it being controlled drugs, first of all, and also because the money flows. You have to treat that very carefully as well, because they can get a lot of scrutiny from the regulators when they conduct their audits. Are you doing this business correctly? And there's not kickbacks and all that kind of stuff going on. So yeah, that's quite a lucrative part of our practice.
Man, I love that stuff, because especially it's like, it's not what they know, it's what they can prove. And so it's
Yeah.
like our business models do what business does, but it's like, how do we account for it? What do we legally call it? The end result's the same. The cash goes from this entity to this entity, but like, we got to do it within the bounds.
Yeah. So you understand there's lots of service fees and platform fees and technological fees and all of this kind of stuff. Yeah. So it's complex stuff. We're fortunate to be in a position where we've been doing this for several years now. So we have an understanding of what the regulators will tolerate and what they won't tolerate. So we're really comfortable now putting all of these businesses in a really compliant position in respect to their commercial arrangements.
Man, offline, I want to talk to some chartered accountants or some CFOs that are doing this for these companies, because I can just imagine like trying to keep the accounting straight for like, this is the sales, these are the expenses, how does this sale get broken out? And then, having to get those numbers right not only get them right, but then documented so it all flows nicely. Because it's similar in the States, trying to get into new markets, there's always these joint ventures type relationships where it's, whether you're going global or just market to market, it's a supply chain. And getting these relationships profitable for both parties is easier said than done, especially when, to your point, some of this product it's highly regulated. And so there is issues where product gets held up or product gets delivered, doesn't meet standards because we have very high standards. This is the medical product. Then who's at fault? Who eats the cost? So yeah, I can imagine those contracts can get quite hefty.
And look, the issues you're raising here go to the heart of why there has been slow progress in the UK, right? To have only 100,000 patients after 7 or 8 years, it's not great, and it's been a real slog for the really early movers. And you're exactly highlighting why it has been a challenge here in the UK. So first of all, quality supply, reliability of supply. You had clinics, they'd find a good supplier, they'd get 100 kilos, they'd sell it all in a month, and then the patient would come back and say, I want the same thing, and they couldn't get it anymore, So there was these types of, those two issues have been addressed, right? We've got good quality product on the market. The Canadians have stopped selling us all of their crap and their small nugs. We're getting big nugs now from Canada. They see the value in making sure that we have quality products, so that's great. Some of the other issues that have caused slow growth is this is a prescription medication, and we don't have that American style culture of being able to advertise and promote prescriptions or medical treatments. There's a general prohibition on the advertisement and promotion of prescription medication. So
probably for the best.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, when I come to the US and I go in my hotel and I turn on the TV and every other advert is for some kind of medication or treatment, that's really strange. We don't have that here. It's a really strange
I remember when it
thing for us
started
to see.
happening and being like, this is weird. Like, and it just over the years now we're used to it. But I remember too, where I'm like, this seems like you shouldn't prescribe these drugs. Like with a cute little, character jumping around the screen. I'm like, this is more serious than that.
And that prohibition on prescription medication promotions has meant that the clinics have struggled to figure out how to actually market their services and get the word out, that medical cannabis is legal and a viable option for a lot of people. So it's taken a little while for the clinics to understand how they can talk about the patient experience, about the quality of their doctors, the customer service, the patient journey, without actually talking about how they've got the best weed and the highest THC and all of this kind of stuff. So that's another problem that's been solved. The clinics are now very innovative and aggressive when it comes to their marketing activities. We have a lot of clinics accessing mainstream media channels. So Curaleaf has had TV ads going out, which is great. Momedica did a whole billboard campaign across London. There's lots of influencer and celebrity marketing now, lots of social media, and awareness is spreading. So that's great. So that issue has been solved. Probably the only real bottleneck now is the doctors. We need more doctors prescribing. We need to get more doctors into the sector. The clinics have dealt with that in some ways. They've created these shared care pyramid prescribing structures. So you just have one specialist doctor at the top writing all the prescriptions, but then below them you have GPs and nurses and healthcare professionals to triage all the patients and funnel things up to one prescriber at the end. But even so, as clinics scale, they take on more and more patients. You've got to have more doctors to keep up with the new appointments and the review appointments as well. So that's something we're all still working on to try and encourage more doctors to come into the sector and feel comfortable prescribing.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Cause yeah, you don't just like, for some reason, I just pictured like a doctor at the tap, just like rubber stamping med cards, but it's like, no, like you got to meet to in person. And even online, which I didn't really realize a lot of them were online, like that speeds it up tremendously because they don't need to take time off work, travel to a location, but you still need someone to meet with them.
Absolutely. And this is the difference between the UK model and the German model. When Germany rescheduled cannabis, they basically removed the need for any sort of face-to-face consultation with a doctor. So now in Germany, when you want to get your medical cannabis prescription, you go online, you tick a few boxes in a questionnaire, and that's it. That then gets signed off by a doctor in Eastern Europe, in Romania or somewhere, and then the pharmacy delivers your cannabis to you within a couple of hours, right? The UK model doesn't work that way. There has to be engagement between the patient and the prescribing doctor, which means a video consultation, usually at least around half an hour. The doctor has to have access to your GP records, your medical records, and there has to be a proper assessment from the doctor to confirm that you're eligible. So obviously, these clinics here in the UK have worked very hard to try and streamline the process, make it as fast as possible, make sure the doctors have the records, they're able to see the patients and make a quick assessment. But it is still a rigorous process, right? The doctors are the doctors and the clinics are the ones who will have to explain themselves to the regulators if something goes wrong and they didn't spend enough time with the patient or they didn't go through the process properly. So, it's a good model here in the UK. We think make sure that patients are receiving the attention and the care that they need. Obviously, clinics here would love to move to a German model and really start to churn out the prescriptions, but I don't see that happening here in any way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. And that is like, that was kind of one of my questions of, like what's driving the difference between them? Cause I think of them as both very similar countries in the sense of like buttoned up, fairly Western, like kind of, I don't know if conservative is the right word, but like the very logical judicial process with like layers of checks and balances. But no, that I remember learning about that too. And kind of, I remember the telehealth of Germany kind of reminded me much more of California, where back in the day, it was fairly easy to get a medical card. Like you didn't need to have a very specific medical illness. You could kind of go in there, have a brief conversation, tell them your back hurts. They're going to give you a script. And then the medical solutions, there's like very large stores where, UK being more strict and like actually requiring a video consultation and not just check the box. It's more strict. Cause it's like people are rule followers at large. And so I think we need to always remember that of like, if you have a specific rules, people will follow them, and if that limits business, it's going to limit business. But everything's in flux, it's like we'll get there at some point. At some point, I do believe there will be adult use cannabis in the UK. It might take 20 years, but probably happen in our lifetime.
Yeah, look, I've always felt it's inevitable. The only thing that's maybe changed my position on that is Germany, right? If it becomes so easy to get a prescription and to be able to choose from a range of products, the argument for a rec market is lessened, right? Maybe people won't push as hard for a rec market when it's that easy to get into the medical market. So that's, I think that's probably a question we will see answered in Germany in the next few years, right? If there's more than 1 million people in Germany receiving a medical cannabis prescription, will they still want to move to a rec model, which is what they wanted originally when they started the CanG reforms? But this gift to the medical market is an interesting point, actually. It was the law of unintended consequences, right? So they descheduled cannabis, in fact. They took it off the narcotics list so that they could legalize grow your own and the social clubs.
Yep.
And the unintended consequence was that it made it so much easier to get a prescription. So the medical market just boomed. So that makes you wonder, will they go back and try and do more rec-type reforms, or will they leave it as it is?
Yeah, a lot of unintended consequences. I'm going to use that because it happens a lot in cannabis. We experienced the CBD market. Like, they legalized hemp for industrial concrete and like textiles and like clothing. And now all of a sudden that CBD became a thing, and other alternative cannabinoids. And like, it's like tens of billions of dollars have been made off of this like fluke that happened, at least in the USA. So no, it makes sense. And I agree with you because it's unique. We're like, in the States, we thought about it differently. We're like, once we go adult use, so many people just go adult use. It's like, well, do we need a medical program? But it's like, it's because we just don't even think of it as real medicine, like elephant in the room. Whereas because you guys treat it like real medicine and it makes it fairly accessible. It's like, well, the people who want it have access to it. Why do we need to spend time thinking about it and dollars just to help greedy private businesses make more money? So it's actually a very logical point where it almost allows you to, like, if you want it, you can get access to it. It makes us able to tax it better and control it more if it stays medical. So no, yeah, we'll see how it plays out. And I never say never in the cannabis industry. I've seen things come and go and change. So no.
No, look, I have clients that think if we can get to sort of 600, 700, 800,000 patients here in the UK, then the conversation about, well, why don't we just legalize across the board will start. But I can tell you that definitely the UK won't be the first in Europe to do it. I know Switzerland has an interesting program going on, and I think they're starting to open rec type dispensaries. But for the moment, we don't see any significant regulatory change in relation to cannabis here in the UK.
No, that makes sense. And so much of it is for sure driven by the businesses. Like, I'm just thinking of like the states, like no state government is like, we're going to champion this initiative and make some change. It's no, the business owners get together, some advocates get together, we get a little bit, and then it's a bigger push to get adult use legalized. And by bigger push, I just mean more investment. Moving on, kind of last two questions here. I want to get you out of here. So in the States, and we talked about a little bit offline, like we've also seen some negative press around medical cannabis, the adult use markets. I know the state of Massachusetts openly has a ballot initiative where they're talking about rolling back adult use back just to medical. There's 3 or 4 other states that have murmurings around it. And so again, it's one of those things where we think we're way past it. It's like, yeah, we've legalized, like people are accepting it, but there's still always different factions of groups for their own reasons or causes that they're not on board with medical or adult use cannabis. So can you tell us a little bit about just the UK and just kind of any recent hot topic kind of conversations around medical cannabis pushback?
Yeah, so in recent weeks, there's been a number of negative articles in the mainstream press about the medical cannabis industry here. And they're very interesting stories. They're complaining about a rec market masquerading as medical. So basically complaining about how easy it is to get a prescription here in the UK. Well, exactly. I mean, compare it to Germany, it's completely different. But the suggestion being is that these clinics are pressurizing their doctors to prescribe to anyone and everyone that engages with the clinic, all in the name of shifting as much product as possible, right? And I think the most of the industry here is quite upset about these types of articles, but I don't think they're overly concerned. You speak to some of the clinics, they say every time one of these articles appears on the front page of the newspaper, we get hundreds and hundreds of new patient registrations, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost the Streisand effect, I think it's called. You bring more attention to something by complaining about it. I also feel it's a bit of a non-argument, because if you're complaining about rec consumers being admitted to the medical market and saying it shouldn't happen, you're almost saying, well, go back and buy from your drug dealer and stay in that area where you belong, right? I take the view one less person buying from the illicit market can only be considered a good thing, right? So again, I think it's a bit of a non-story in that respect. And look, ultimately, you speak to the clinics, these are heavily regulated businesses, right? They have a number of licenses that are very difficult to get. They have very experienced doctors working there, will take their regulatory and professional obligations very, very seriously. So I know that a lot of the clinics are quite affronted by these articles and the suggestion that they are sidestepping the rules or ignoring them altogether. It's simply not true. These are heavily regulated businesses. They are regularly audited by all of the licensing authorities, and ultimately every patient sees a doctor and has that 30-minute consultation with a doctor. And if the doctor's happy to prescribe, then I just don't see how anyone could complain about that at all. So I don't think these articles will stop. I think there's a small faction within the UK that wants to keep cannabis very pharmaceutical and not make it widely available in the way that it's starting to become. But I think the genie's out of the bottle. I think these companies know how to operate. They know how to be compliant. I don't think there'll be any slowdown in patient growth. And it seems these articles will just contribute to that awareness push.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And because the businesses have been around, they're no longer first-year startups, third-year startups. Like many cannabis companies, especially globally, are in between 5 to 10 years old. Some of them may even be older than 10, but they've got enough years under their belt now of trying, so they know how to do it, and rightfully so, like very regulated. A question that just popped into my head: were any of the clinics that are currently prescribing cannabis in the UK, were they created specifically for the cannabis industry? Because to your point, like, I'd be pissed too if I was a doctor of 10, 20, 30 years and now there's a new drug on the market, and as I have done for 30 years now, starting to prescribe it, and then have people be like trying to say that I'm just trying to like push, cannabis because I have to enrich myself. So are the clinics that are prescribing cannabis, were they already prescribing non-cannabis drugs before and now they just add this on there? I'm assuming some of them are new, but how much of the 300 were created just for cannabis, and how many of them have just always been around and this is just simply a new product that they can prescribe?
No, so the big clinics were all established for the purposes of prescribing medical cannabis. So they are medical cannabis clinics. Obviously, this sort of health optimization industry that's building up, a lot of these clinics are adding other types of treatments to their services. There will be some established clinics, pain clinics and mental health clinics that are adding cannabis to the services that they offer, but the vast majority of patients will be engaged with dedicated medical cannabis clinics. And interestingly, from a regulatory perspective, this can sometimes cause a problem for marketing and promotional activities. For example, if your medical cannabis website lists conditions which you are able to prescribe cannabis for, the regulators don't like that, because they say if you're only offering one treatment at the end, then by listing these conditions, you are marketing that one treatment, which you're not allowed to do. So it's an interesting situation where these private clinics have sprung up just for this one product, but the fact that they're only giving one form of medication can end up being quite restrictive for what they do.
My little hustler mind's like, we'll just prescribe some other alternative next.
Well, exactly, yeah, and it's
there's extracts of the
absolutely. If you can start to add more treatment offerings, and I think you'll start to see that. You'll start to see these more alternative wellness type clinics, these plant-based therapy clinics, offering cannabis and other things as well. So I definitely think you'll start to see more of that in the UK.
That's cool, because it is more of like a health and wellness. And I've even seen some of the products in the United States. They're coming out more, it started with sleep aid. Okay, let's just pair this with like the melatonin, the magnesium pills we
Um,
take. And so they're getting more into, trying to pair cannabis with other naturally occurring healthy type nootropics, so to speak.
yeah, yeah. And we sort of call it modern ailments: pain, anxiety, insomnia. You can have your very pharmaceutical cannabis where you have Bedrocan producing their oils for these epilepsy conditions, but you can also have a sort of separate industry for these modern ailments, for these more wellness type issues.
Question, just because I have you here, and then I swear to God, I'll get you out of here. I think of it more like a generational thing too, where like our generation, like we're just a little bit more accepting to like doctors prescribing non-pharmaceutical pills or shots or like treatments. It's like, oh yeah, they're like a doctor that has some type of alternative medicines that they're prescribing. But they're usually just naturally occurring. It's like, oh, they're more of like a natural type one. Whereas like I feel like my parents' generation, they're like, no, you go to the doctor, you get a pill. It comes from Bayer or some other massive pharmaceutical company. We're not going to risk it with these new age startups, VC backed medical companies. But I guess like in the UK, like how are you guys seeing it? Like, is it younger people getting their medical cards and taking advantage of these clinics? Is it, more elderly people who are like, cool, like I have an alternative to some of these more intense drugs that I've been issued? Like, what are you seeing as far as like a demographic breakdown of the medical patients?
I think it's quite a broad church at the moment, actually, Ray. I mean, there are now clinics popping up to target certain demographics. So you have some clinics now that will focus on female-related issues. You will have clinics that will target elderly patients. And I think there is all of these clinics are working hard to open people's minds, and even some elderly relatives of mine who I know would never have considered cannabis medications to be a real thing. They've got their vapes now, and for their arthritis and for all of these types of things. So we're quite happy that the demographics are spread quite well, but there is still a huge population unaware that medical cannabis is available and viable for them here in the UK to educate, right? So that's exciting too, to be able to grow the addressable market and bring more people in to see the medical cannabis is a viable option for them is exciting.
No, I agree. It's worse. We think, being in it since 2018, you're like, oh, we're so close to the finish line. But I still kind of think it's like, we're honestly just getting started. And in baseball terms, like we're through the first inning, but we're still within like the second or third inning. There's a lot of game left. So with that in mind, what has you excited about the next, 1 to 3 years in the cannabis industry and looking forward to 2026? Where can people find you, Robert?
I think there's a real exciting understanding about patient acquisition now. How do we bring more people into the legal regime? We've got some new clinics coming to market with some really innovative and aggressive marketing strategies. I'm quite excited to see how quickly patient numbers increase in 2026 and 2027. And then that's going to have a knock-on effect in terms of the corporate commercial activity. And we're just starting to see signs of life from a deal perspective here in Europe. High Tide took a position in Remexian in Germany. BAT and Organigram have done a deal for Sanity Group on a high valuation. And I think yeah, exactly. And that's given people confidence now that there's going to be capital flowing back into the industry. I think you'll start to see that deal activity ramp up in the next couple of years. I think there'll be clinics in the UK being acquired. And also, I hope some companies will resurrect their IPO ambitions and really push on to raise capital and grow rapidly as economic prospects improve over here. So yeah, it's a really, really exciting time.
Nice. All righty. Well, thanks again for your time. I guess you're a modern man. People can find you just by Googling your name. They'll find you.
Yeah, sure.
Well, that'll be
Yeah.
included in the show notes. But again, Robert, thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to catching up with you in London next time I'm over there in a few months. But you have a good day.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. See you soon, okay?
Yep. Bye-bye.